We
Yeah.
forgot to train people how to have a business conversation as opposed to a features conversation. Once they start telling you why they're not at their vision, you
Yeah.
know what you can help them solve. The research that I did suggested that there's zero correlation between satisfaction and loyalty.
Sales can really open up to you when you start to really put yourself in a buyer's shoe and you start to think like them and feel like them. Okay, so here's the question I want each of you to really think about. So wherever you're at right now, whether you're driving down the road to your next appointment, okay? Maybe you're about to get on a Zoom meeting with a client who you're just following up with. Maybe you're in a boardroom meeting now, or you're on Zoom about to meet with a boardroom to finalize an agreement, or maybe you're just in the gym thinking about the rest of your day and how your prospecting is going to go, or you're about to pick up the phone to make a call. I want you to stop whatever you're doing and really think about what it takes. What does it actually take to be a top 1% salesperson in your industry, okay? Or a top selling organization in your industry. You know, the company that has all the accolades, the salesperson who makes all the money, who gets any promotion they want. In fact, they turn down promotions. They have all the respect in the company. The salespeople who lead by example, the companies who everybody wants to emulate. Well, my next guest is going to answer that question for you. And let me give you a small taste of this man's background. My guest today started in B2B sales in the 80s, around the time fax machines were the height of communications. We'll talk about that. And he started off on the phone and has held almost every possible role in sales over the years. He's worked with companies of all sizes, helping them improve and achieve their revenue goals. People have labeled him a brilliant sales technician. I love that, which is fine by him, as he truly believes that success in sales is all about execution. Everything else is just talk. And apparently, there is no shortage of talk in the sales world today. And I definitely agree with that. We're going to talk about that. This is why his work is focused on helping sales teams and organizations better execute their sales process. And with the laser focus on metrics and process, he helps clients improve critical aspects of their sales cycle, including aligning the buyer process, very important, removing the redundancies to shorten their sales cycles, extremely important, increasing close ratios, and creating double-digit growth through the execution of strategy and through tactical execution. I love the tactical. He also helps improve adoption and, by extension, the behavioral change required for ongoing improvement in execution and results. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Tibor Shanto. Tibor, did I pronounce your name right?
You absolutely did. You nailed it. Thank you, Jeremy.
You know, if I ever pronounce a name wrong on the show, I go back and I say, you know, my mom always says we don't know how to spell. We're from Arkansas. That's always my go-to excuse. So I love talking, you know, I love having experts like you on this show to really help our listeners. And we talk about human behavior and sales techniques that work with human behavior. Whereas what we find is that most sales training out there, I hate to say it, are using old school techniques that actually work against human behavior. So I love when I have experts like you that understand the selling game and the process. So let's do this. I want to dive right into your story and give our listeners really a feel for your background and how you've gotten to this point where you're like one of the elite authorities on sales and leadership. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how all this started for you? Like, how did you learn all these skills?
So I think, like many people, I probably can fall into the accidental salesperson category.
Right.
You know, in the mid 80s, having just come out of university and having repaid my student loans, I was at this crossroad of what do I do with my life now?
Sure.
And somebody gave me a tip on a stock. And I went after it, you know, and I actually made money on this stock in a relatively short period of time, which gave me the entirely wrong impression of the securities market. So then, you know, the person gave me another tip the following week, and I learned my most valuable lesson by losing twice as much as I'd gained the week before. So I figured that there's got to be more to this game than meets the eye. And I found out that in Canada, the equivalent of your Series 7 or whatever it's called now, in order to apply for that registered rep license, you had to be with a licensed firm. And the only position licensed firms would offer you were fully commissioned. So you weren't on their books, but you were able to use their label to get licensed. And so that's how I initially came into the world of sales. Of course, I was going to be high finance. I wasn't going to be sales. So I avoided the label for a long time.
Right.
But then after a while, I realized that what I'm doing job after job is sales. So I better get serious and become a student of the craft.
Yeah.
And that's how I got into sales. And eventually I found myself in a position where I was in charge of training for one of the divisions of Dow Jones. And that's what got me to turn the corner into sales training. I think I still sell, and that's what makes the training part an interesting balance, because I get to actually share with customers. You know, I tell them I may not have every single answer you people are looking for, but I could tell them what I did yesterday in response to the same thing.
Yeah, I love that. You know, and I was watching you on a video a little bit earlier today, and you mentioned how many salespeople say that value is in the eyes of the beholder. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely not.
Tell us why.
Because I think value is a very important thing. It's something that's part of almost, I would say, every sales conversation, whether it's a B2C or a B2B conversation. You know, customers are looking for value. We as organizations are looking to deliver value. So it starts from a good place, right?
Sure.
But then if it's not defined, then it's hard to deliver. And all humor aside, I suggest managers take 5 of their salespeople and ask them to define value. And by the end of the exercise, you'll have 7 different definitions, because the first 2 will change their mind based on what the next 3 say.
Sure.
So if you can't agree internally what value is, how are you going to persuade somebody that isn't out to buy anything from you that you can actually deliver something of value? So I put a lot of emphasis with my customers on not just having a clear and actionable definition of value, because we're not looking for one of those mission statement declarations for the lobby. We want something that's going to turn us into money. But you want a definition that you can share with your customers, because most customers will talk value, but few will have a clear definition.
Yeah.
And if you ask them to define value and they don't have a clear definition, you can share yours and they can buy into it.
Sure.
Then I think you have the inside track on that conversation.
Yeah, and we'll cover that. And I think it's asking the right questions at the right time in the conversation that get your prospect to focus more on results-based thinking, whereas most salespeople don't know how to do that. So they're getting the prospect to focus on lowest cost thinking. And there's a big difference between lowest cost thinking in your prospect's mind to results-based thinking. Because at that point, when they start thinking results-based thinking, and you're the salesperson there in that account, you're asking the right questions at the right time to get them to think that, it doesn't really matter what your price is, because the end goal of the objectives that they actually want to hit, the problems they want solved. Now, let's go into this. You co-authored a book on trigger events. Can you expand on that a bit, on what trigger events actually means?
So trigger events, I mean, they go way back. I think initially they were invented in the 70s. I forget the fellow's name, but we all know the blue blocker sunglasses.
Yeah.
So when he came out with a marketing plan for that, that was the initial. And he figured out that there's certain things that could trigger certain reactions. And I think with my co-author, he evolved it to where you can look for certain triggers that will create certain behaviors in your customers. And more importantly, those will allow us to take advantage of a change in scenario. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples.
Sure.
So a change in personnel. So let's say you're targeting a VP of something. You pick the function, right? So if you've had a good relationship with her, let's say at company A, if she gets a promotion and moves to company B, well, that's one opportunity. So her moving triggered one opportunity. Sure. She's going to be replaced at the company that she's at now. So that's a second opportunity. And if that person came from the outside, well, somebody has a vacancy there that you can go and sell to as well. Different trigger event would be a regulatory event. Let's say there's a change in a regulatory environment. Let's say you read in the newspaper, more likely now on social media, that a company has secured a second round of financing. So that might be so it's any event, and we generally put it into change in events, change in regulatory, things along those lines that will cause a reaction on the part of the person being impacted.
Okay.
And then it's up to us to leverage that reaction.
How can a salesperson leverage that reaction to their advantage? What can they do?
So I think there's a couple of ways. I think first of all, they need to look at certain trends in their industry. So, sales, there is some work involved. So I'm sorry to say that, but they need to, sort of do some research about their industry and see if there's any discernible trends or patterns that are based on either regularly occurring events within that industry or secular events that happen, on an unpredictable but regular basis. So when doing the book, we read an interesting stat somewhere that when a new CFO comes in, they generally go through a hierarchy of things that they go through to prove their worth, that they were hired. And according to this piece of study, they got around to reviewing the office supply contract about 9 months after they stepped into the role. So if you're an office supply salesperson, as soon as you see that there's a notice of a new person being hired, then you've got about 9 months to either solidify yourself if you're the incumbent, or 9 months to come up with a good plan as to how to knock the incumbent out. I'll give you a specific one that I use for myself, and feel free to use it. So I sell sales training. So what triggers that is change in personnels. So I have a resume up on all the job boards around the country, Zip, Indeed, whatever. Not because I'm looking for a job, but if I post a resume, it allows me the right to then put in agents. And basically, every time somebody posts a job for a salesperson, I get an email notice and they get a phone call asking them how they're going to ramp this person up. So that's an example of how I use trigger events in my business.
That's pretty savvy. I like that. And I was on your website yesterday, and you talk a lot and your methodology, a lot about objective-based selling. What does that mean? What does that mean? So our listeners understand what you mean by objective-based selling.
So, one of the epilogues that comes out of the Trigger Event book is, I found that co-authoring a book is a lot like marriage. You have to learn to compromise, where to give and where to take and things like that.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that my co-author and I, disagreed on, and it was honest and intellectual discussion, was, whether there's opportunities to sell to people who are deemed to be status quo. So if we loosely look at the market, there's about 10% who are actively looking. They're out there hitting your website. They have identified their own
They know
need.
they have problems, right? 10%.
Right. Yeah. There's about 20% that I call passively looking. So they know that they might need to buy a machine next year, but that's next year. So in their mind, they have a luxury of time. It might have taken them 4 months to do it last time about 3 years ago. They had a couple of months for development. Sure. So if they don't have to make this decision for 18 months, they got 12 months to wait.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of salespeople sort of blow it, because they sort of diarize to call them back instead of using those 12 months to really become the emotional favorite and shape the thinking of that prospect. But that leaves the 70% that are status quo. So the usual pitch that most pundits wind up salespeople to go out there with is to say, do you have a need? Do you have a problem? Do you need my solution? The 10% certainly recognize it. Yeah, man, I've been looking for this for the last 5 days.
Sure.
The passive say, I sort of get what you're talking about, but there's no sense of urgency on my part. So, send me some stuff. We've all heard that.
Yeah.
But you call the status quo and you say, do you have this need? Do you have this pain? Are you looking for this solution? By definition, you're asking them to say no, because they're status quo. They're happy. They're doing their business. They're dealing with life day to day. So we disagreed on the opportunity to have success selling to the status quo, because I've done it for years and I continue to do it. So I step back and try. Yeah. So I try to step back and understand what the difference in thinking was and so on.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of research, and I think where my co-author was stuck and still is that he equated satisfaction with loyalty. So he felt that as long as somebody was satisfied, there was no opportunity to switch them. The research that I did suggested that there's zero correlation between satisfaction and loyalty.
Yeah.
So
nobody's 100% satisfied with anything they have. If I go out and buy a new car today, in 2 or 3 weeks from now, I might want something different on that car, something I might not like. Nobody has ever liked 100% of what they have. And I think you hit it right on the head, because here's what you have to understand. To be a top salesperson in a top selling organization, you have to be able to sell to the status quo, because most of your prospects don't even know what their problems are. They don't.
100%.
Right? Only, you're right, 10% do. The other, 70, 80% have no idea what their problems are. Or maybe they know about a problem, but maybe like they're passive. They know about the problem, but they don't know how bad the problem really is. Or maybe they don't know the consequences if they don't do anything about solving that problem. So your expertise, we call salespeople that learn this craft problem finders and problem solvers, not product pushers. Your expertise of asking the right questions at the right time in that conversation allow that prospect to surface problems in their mind that they didn't even think they have. That's how you sell to the status quo.
So when I kept exploring that, I came across a very particular piece of research. It was in a book called Customer Loyalty Guaranteed by two guys called Bell and Patterson. And what they showed is that 75% of people who switch from vendor A to vendor B, 75% from Verizon to AT&T, said that they were either satisfied or completely satisfied at the time that they switched.
Right.
So I felt good because I knew I was in the right camp, but I had no idea why.
Sure.
So I continued the research. And what I found through talking to my customers, people who left me, and a whole host of other people, is that the one thing that all business people have, and the one thing that all businesses are based around, are objectives.
Yeah.
So everybody has a business objective. So let's take our friends, the 10% who are in pain. Once I solve the problem that they're having right now, the pain that they're experiencing, they still have an ongoing business that they're concerned with. So if I can talk to those long-term objectives with an eye on solving the immediate one, I've got a much longer-term conversation. But more importantly, if I call somebody in the status quo and talk about the objectives I've helped other companies like them achieve, now there's something that resonates with them. If I call them and they ask them if they have a problem and they're denying the problem, they're going to deny it to me too. Sure. But if I talk to them about objectives that they are likely to have that I've helped other companies achieve, that's an entirely different proposition.
Well, when you talk about those objectives and then ask them, what's held them back from achieving them so far, sometimes problems start to surface it's a little bit more detailed conversation, but sometimes problems start to surface that, like you said, they didn't realize they had.
I'll share a technique your audience can take use of. One of my favorite things is, if occasionally, and it should never happen, but if occasionally I go into a meeting unprepared, the easiest thing if I'm dealing with an executive, and I do this regularly, once we get through the small talk, Jeremy, if we were sitting here 18 months from now and you were telling me that your team had hit a grand slam, what would that look like?
Yeah.
And you see people doing exactly what you did. They think about it for a second. All of a sudden it hit a nerve. What's this business leader going to do? He's going to think about the future. She's going to forecast where she wants to take the company. Yeah. So you see them literally sitting back, looking up a second, and then they start telling you all these things. And the biggest mistake salespeople can make is to talk in the middle of that flow, right? Sure. To interrupt. But once they finish telling you all the things that they see as being a grand slam, nirvana in 18 months, right? Then I sit back, I look at it, and I look them in the eye, and I go, so Jeremy, I get where you're going. I understand your vision. Help me understand why you're not there now.
Yeah.
And the answer to that is what you sell to.
Yeah.
Because once they start telling you why they're not at their vision, you know what you can help them solve.
Yeah. Then they start to realize that they have certain problems that they might not have thought they had. And then your questioning ability helps them uncover the root cause of those problems and what those problems are doing to them, even on a personal note. And that's really where emotions come out, right? That's really, you're like peeling the layers off the onion. The top salespeople in the industry are the best at peeling more layers off that onion to help find out the core of that person. But more importantly, that person or that company's finding out the core of really where they want to go and what's holding them back from getting there. I love your training on that. So what you're suggesting is that objectives can be leveraged throughout the cycle then.
Throughout the cycle and throughout the segment, just because they're in pain doesn't mean that they don't want to, once they're past that pain, they don't have growth plans and things like that.
Yeah, I love that. Now, I want to expand on this because I was reading this on your website. Can you expand on your view of what you call the timing element? What does that mean?
So there's two parts of it, but I think the one that you're referring to is, the industry has come to the point, and it's probably a different program as to why, but they've come to the point where they're trying to have perfect timing. They're trying to pick off that 10% exactly when it's there. But as you had indicated earlier, even if you picked off every 10% that was available, you're still not going to make quota, right?
No way, not even close.
So the question is, how do you engage with the person regardless of where they are and then continue that evolution forward? So I always say, let's borrow from marketing. They have the awareness stage, they have the consideration stage, and then they have the decision stage. And I think sales has an opportunity to do the same thing. but we forgot to tell people how to talk to the status quo. We forgot to train people how to have a business conversation as opposed to a features conversation.
Sure.
So when they run into somebody that's in status quo that could entirely benefit from their product, but would phrase it in a different way, they just write it off as saying not ready, and they send it back for nurturing. And that's what I mean by timing, is rather than being timers, learn how to speak at least 3 languages, active, passive, and status quo, and you won't have to worry about the timing.
You don't, yeah, because you can sell to everybody. So, I mean, why would you only want to be able to sell to 10% of your audience when you really could sell to 100%? I mean, that's where you as a sales organization starts to make tens of millions of dollars a year, or as a salesperson, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year when you learn how to sell to your entire audience. Now, how can a salesperson pull this together for effective prospecting now?
As I said, there is some work involved. I used to own the domain that sales is a blue collar job, right? Because people don't believe that they have to do some lifting at some point during sales, right? So I use a tool that people can access on my website called the 360-degree deal view.
Okay.
And as the name implies, what I do is I put all the deals that go into the top of my pipe through it at the end, whether I'd won, lost, or it went to no decision. And there's specific questions that I ask, so they can download it from the website. And if they want, I would encourage them to call me and I can walk them through it. But there's very specific business-based questions, not how do you like my product type questions.
Sure.
That help me understand not only what objectives I was able to help the customer achieve, but the impact of those objectives on their business. So unlike others, I don't go back a few months. I don't go back a few weeks later. I wait 6-7 months. And instead of asking about the product, I ask how their workflow has changed, right?
Sure.
And by changing that workflow, what are they able to achieve? And by capturing that, I can now begin to have a conversation with the next person that looks like that around objectives and impacts that I was involved in. And that's how, so the work is to understand what were some of the things. So bring it into prospecting. This is where you talked about earlier, human behavior comes into play. So the old saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words is absolutely accurate. So what I try and do is understand what the objectives of that individual might be. Again, from a value definition, how do I help them achieve those objectives?
Sure.
And then give examples of that in literally snapshot type things. Because when you're interrupting somebody in the middle of their day, which is what we do when we prospect, we interrupt people. I have no problem with it. I have it on a business card, right?
Sure.
So, because it's what we do. Doctors don't apologize for cutting you open when it helps you, right? So, when you interrupt them, you have to help them focus. And most people try and rely on a lot of words and sentences and things that they learned in English class, as opposed to going for imagery.
Sure.
So I try and imagine, I don't know where you are, but the busiest highway where I am is called the Don Valley. And if you're going to work downtown in the business core, you can bet that you're going to be sitting on it for extended amount of time every morning.
Sure.
So I try and figure out what is the person that I'm going to prospect? What were they thinking about stuck in that traffic on the last Wednesday of the quarter? And once I understand what they were thinking about, I understand now what their objectives might be. The work comes in figuring that out. But once I have a roadmap of what their objectives might be, what I've read about the company and so on, then into my prospecting, I just lead with outcomes that I've been able to help other people achieve, with the goal that they will ask me, how do you do that? Or at least with the goal that they'll recognize that I'm talking about something different than the last 5,000 sales calls they had.
Exactly. Now, I want to ask you this, and I usually ask our guests this question. What's one of the most important questions a salesperson should ask the prospect in the sales process? What's one of the most important questions?
I think the most important, I need to think about that for a second, because there's about 2 or 3. I generally like to lead the question with something that I know is likely to be on the mind of the person. I'm not looking for a challenge. I'm not looking for something that they have trouble with. I'm looking for something that I can expand into a business conversation. So to do that, again, one of the things that I look for is where is their variance likely to be between where they are and where they want to be.
Sure.
So to me, the most important question comes around a variance that I'm aware of. So I'll give you an example. With a VP of sales, if I suspect, again, based on their industry, based on background and information that I know, if I know that it's likely that they would benefit from my prospecting program, one of the questions I would ask you is, I'm curious how much of your current revenue comes from existing customers versus brand new. And they always give me a number like, 85, 15, 90, 10, something like that.
Sure.
And I say, so if I looked at your 2020 plan, what did you have in there? And it's generally a different number, usually 80, 20.
Yeah.
So notice what they've done now is they've given me two numbers, and I know that they're not at their objective. There's a gap between where they are.
There's your gap.
Yeah. So when you say what's the most important question, to me, I tend to interpret that as what are the most important topics of conversation that I can initiate that will roll because they're relevant to the prospect.
Okay. So now
but they're generally based around the gap.
Yeah. So now that you've identified the gap, what would be a follow-up question you would use there?
So I have a whole methodology. So most salespeople, once they identify a gap, their tendency is to jump into it and try and sell to it, right?
Present solution.
But it's a waste of time. My very next question, once that thing comes up, that there's this very next thing else, go, Jeremy, that's interesting. What do you attribute that to? So I want to hear from them what they think the situation is the way that it is. Yeah. And then I follow through and I say, I get it. I see that. So help me understand if you were able to actually achieve, if you filled the gap that you're experiencing now, so I make them understand that they're actually in a gap, right? Yeah. What would that mean to you? And that's something that salespeople have to stay patient with. You really have to get them to think about what the meaning of the upside is, because my view, and feel free to tell me if I'm wrong, they've demonstrated that they're able to suppress this need. Every night they go home knowing that they're not delivering yet. Yeah. They haven't done anything about it.
Well, you've helped them identify the gap, and you're asking them, achieving that. What would that do for you? Right. And it gets them to think about the future, about their present situation. If they had filled that gap, where they can be or where they can go, right? You can also
get them emotionally re-engaged with that. Right now they've sort of they've learned to rationalize the gap as it is, right? But if you can get them to visualize the upside, they get emotionally re-engaged in wanting to do something.
Yeah, and on the flip side, you can also ask what we call a consequence question, where what are you going to do if nothing changes? Like if you don't fill this gap, like what are some of the possible ramifications? That gets them to think like, oh crap, what are the consequences if I don't do anything about solving this gap, this problem?
100%.
So you want them to think about the consequences, but also like what can happen when they solve it. You want to be able to do both, get them in that, present state into their future state for sure. But what are the consequences if they don't do anything about it?
And that's so important. You're so right, because a lot of times salespeople figure, hey, the guy's smiling, he's taking it all in. But they're people just like we're people. And by the time we leave the parking lot, we all revert back to our comfort zone, right? So unless you leave that element of risk behind, and that's what it is, we're introducing risk into the thing. Like, the VP of sales, when I ask him, how long can you go on sustaining this? They know I'm asking him how long before you get fired, right? So, let's not fool each other. And then the other thing that you want to do is attach some monetary value to it. So I emphasize monetary because it's value and different than what we talked about. And I ask him, so assuming that we achieved all this and assuming the program was able to do what we agreed needs to be done, what's that worth to you? And then the idea is to extrapolate that worth over time, because if early in the conversation I was able to find out that their average salesperson has a tenure of 5 years, well, that advantage now extends over 5 years. So I need to extrapolate my value over those same 5 years.
Yeah, I love that, Tibor. And here's the question I've been wanting to ask you. What can a salesperson do to help them change their mindset and start focus on more of this objective-based selling, rather than just solution selling? Like what can they do to change their mindset in that way of thinking?
I think the first thing is get in the habit of reviewing your deals, whether you've won, lost, or they went to no decision, because, it's right there. It just needs to be analyzed and discovered.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, I think they need to get familiar with the mechanics of their sale. Because again, we're all up against this 24-hour clock. We're all up against other challenges. So I think that as they get to know, as they review their deals and they begin to see certain trends, they begin to see that there's something present in all their losses and there's something present in all their wins. And then the question is, okay, why is that? How does that correlate to our strengths? Yeah. So, earlier in terms of when you were thinking about that one thing that salespeople, at the top of the interview, I think the one thing that A players have, and I don't think it's just in sales, I think in all industries, is almost an obsessive curiosity about the fundamentals. How does this thing work? So I think that salespeople need to have that, even if they've been in the industry for 10 years and they've had success, they need to go back and figure out, why is this thing working? And what you'll find is each time you'll discover something new.
I agree. What's the psychology behind the buying process? Like, until you understand, and you start to think more like a buyer rather than thinking like a seller, sales can really open up to you. When you start to really put yourself in a buyer's shoe and you start to think like them and feel like them, you become more open to conversations back when they tell you their concerns, when they're more open and honest with you. And they only do that with you if they feel like they trust you. And that trust is only built by you really learning the right questions to ask at the right time, and really how to listen to what they mean, not just what they say. And
here's the catch-22. To get that level of engagement that you just described, which I think is key, you have to ask tough questions, yet salespeople want to be friends in relationships, so they don't ask tough questions. They're killing themselves.
They have to ask questions that help challenge the status quo.
Yeah, difficult questions.
That makes you appear like you're a credible expert, right? Not just a needy salesperson that's just agreeing with everything. Hey, I can't thank you enough for being on here today. That was a great conversation, really going to help a lot of people listening in. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners today?
Again, I think that, as I say, I used to own the domain "no one ever died" as well, meaning that, you try it and you learn something and you apply it again and you learn something new. So clearly, I wouldn't suggest that you jump off a cliff after a prospect, nor would I say chase him into the middle of a highway. But on the other hand, if it's legal, ethical, and morally centered, I think you should try it and see what you learn.
I love it. Okay, so where can our listeners learn more about you and your training? Where can they go? I want them to get involved with what you're teaching. It's so important.
So 2 places. The simplest is tiborshanto.com. So TIBORSHANTO.com. But I'm also launching a new site this weekend on August 1st. So I think this will air after that. Okay. And it's called the Proactive Prospecting Club. And literally the domain is proactiveprospecting.club. And it's a destination aimed for B2B prospectors. So it's got a lot of exclusive, unique material from me. We're bringing on a lot of other experts. The key is, unlike other sites where, you get basically an old program and then some mastermind groups around it, the goal of the Proactive Prospecting Club is daily updates, weekly webinars, weekly Ask Me Anything sessions, and so on. And for your members, if they went there on August 1st and they wanted to take advantage of it, and they use the discount code CAL, then they will get a 50% discount from the annual cost of the membership.
Oh, yeah. So we're going to put that on the show notes here to make sure that everybody can go there. Make sure you get there, really take in what Tibor's talking to you about today and really apply it. And it's definitely going to help you make more sales as an organization, if you're a company owner or if you're an individual salesperson. Tibor, thanks for having you on. I'm going to have you on here again. Stay safe out there.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to it.
Now, if you're serious about joining the top 1%, I mean the top 1%, and you want to experience more training content just like this, click the links right over there. Right over there, they're exactly what you need to see next. You see, I release new episodes featuring top salespeople and sales authorities, multiple 6-figure, high 6-figure, even 7-figure earners every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday every single week at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And if you're new here, do yourself a favor and smash that subscribe button right below, and join our new Facebook group, Sales Revolution. You see, it's free, and there's a link in the description below just for you. We put it there for you. Finally, I make posts on Facebook and Instagram each and every day with more tips and training. So be sure and follow me and turn on your notifications. So make a comment in the first 7 minutes to any of my latest posts, share this episode, and there's a very real chance that you're going to win some killer prizes. And here's the thing. Don't sit on the sidelines. Don't be like everyone else. Get into the game. Join the sales revolution. Stay active. Get involved. Learn the right skills, and we will show you how to take your life and income to a level that most only dream about. Stay safe. Talk to you soon.